have it's really nice to be able to have the doors open and let people come in and explore it. And so I've sat in there before, and it's always kind of interesting. A lot of people from out of town come in for locals, and so it's cool to expose them to this site. Mount Pleasant was the home of Alexander Whitaker, who was my understanding is he was actually like the local tax collector, became quite wealthy, and he built Mount Pleasant in the late 1700s. It then passed to the Cecil family, which I think is different than the Sicils that are in town today. But you can see this is another example, especially in this left-hand picture, which was taken in the 1930s. Um, Again, very similar to the John Poole house. You know, it's that Tidewater style that I mentioned, where you've got the front roof and then it kind of slopes back behind it. And what you're looking at there, which I've always thought was kind of cool, is in the front, we've got the house. In kind of the middle part, we've got this connected passageway. And in the rear, the stone structure back there would have been kind of the kitchen that was initially fully detached from the home. And that was largely to prevent fires from spreading across the home. Today, what we've got is what we see on the right. So the main part of the home, the front part of the home, um, experienced a pretty significant fire in I believe it was the late 1960s, early 1970s, and it had to be torn down, but the stone portion remained, and so it still sits there today, and has kind of been refurbished, and certainly the structure has been strengthened over time. So we still have a portion of Mount Pleasant here. Um, However, the only maybe downside to this is it's this one is impossible to see from the road. It's actually right past the pool, if you like the county pool as you're leaving town. If you go past that a little bit on the right, there's kind of a gravel driveway that goes way, way, way back. This thing is way back there. Honestly, I can only imagine what this place would have been like when it was initially built in the late 1700s, just how far out into no man's land this thing would have sat. So this Hemstone house, I think, is a fascinating one that I don't know much about. I think I'm actually going to go see the interior of it in the next couple of days, which is exciting for me because I've never been inside of it before. These pictures that you see here are from years ago when it was for sale. That's always one of the ways that I can get some interior pictures, is if an old home has been on the market in the last 10 or 15 years. Sometimes the pictures stay up on the internet, and so I can go and take a look. But I've never been in there myself, and I'm sure it looks quite different today. Um, this house, we believe that actually it was initially a log structure, and that this frame structure that we see today, which was built in the late 1870s, um, was either built kind of in front of it or literally built around the initial log structure. And so it was home to the Hemstone family for a number of years, many Hemstones in the area. And what's interesting too is the the width of White's Ferry Road there, which now it sits almost right on the road. This is right across the street from St. Peter's, again, pretty close to the county pool. But when it was initially built, I suspect that actually it was it had a little bit more breathing room. I think the road has been widened a bit over the last century or so. But really an interesting kind of style. It has some elements of Victorian and some interesting, like the diamond attic window up top. I've always thought was kind of an interesting style choice that I haven't seen in other places. And so I'm excited to check this one out and see what it potentially looks like on the inside. Hall House. This is another structure that, we've all driven past many, many times, actually right kind of next to that Hemstone house I just showed you. Um, the earliest portions come from the late 1700s, early 1800s. And then it's one of those places where we've seen kind of additions over the years. You can see if you look at the big kind of elongated picture here where the chimney is, you can kind of see the division line coming down the house. That was an addition to the home, which makes sense because they typically used a lot of symmetry in these houses when they built back then. And so you wouldn't build a house and put the door off center like this. So this was clearly added on to. What's interesting about this place is down in the basement, there is it's like it looks like a I guess it is a chimney, but it was also thought to have been a place where early residents were actually melting, I think maybe lead and building and producing bullets for use in muskets, which is kind of an interesting story. And at some point in the early 1900s, it was actually a boarding house. And I think there were a lot of teachers that were living here. So it's been through a lot of iterations, a lot of owners, underwent kind of a fairly significant restoration on the interior in I want to say in the 70s. And so, I don't think when we look at these pictures on the right, the way that this structurally is laid out, the general structure might be original, but the way that the kind of second floor is exposed like this is obviously not what we would have seen in the early 1800s. I like the way that they've kept the logs and everything. And I think it's an interesting look, but I don't think that that's original. This is so the 1785 house, which is, right at the corner of White's Ferry and West Willard. I've always joked, and I'm kind of serious. My favorite part of the 1785 house is that it was built in 1830, which leads to a lot of questions about why is it called the 1785 house? And perhaps Jim knows, but my general sense in asking around is that people aren't completely sure. When the home was built here, there was a wood home structure to the rear of the house. I've seen it described as different things, from like a smokehouse to a kitchen to an actual structure. But there is some thought that perhaps that early structure was built in 1785, and that's where the name kind of comes from. But we're not really sure. I think it's, this is one of those places that is such a kind of weird looking. It's very different from any other house in its size and its dimensions. Um, these small square windows on the front of the home are really unique. I haven't seen any other homes in the area that have kind of these small 4-pane squared windows like this. The other interesting thing was this home was, I mean, obviously it's brick, but it was unpainted red brick until the early 1960s when it was painted white, which is how it looks today, as you can see on the right. And so it's just kind of an interesting structure. I've never actually been on the inside. I would love to see the inside of this home. But when we look back, this is one of those rare places where when you look back at old pictures, the picture on the left is from the 1930s and picture on the right is more recent. There really is not any clear change that I can really detect. I mean, a couple of small things. The chimney on the left is capped up top and it's not there today. That looks like there was an interior chimney on kind of the smaller portion of the house, which I don't see today. It could be behind this roof line, but I don't see it. But and the shutters are gone. But generally speaking, this structure remains very much the same as it was back in those days. And you can only imagine sitting on the main street here in town, being built in 1830, this thing has seen a lot of interesting things go past it over the centuries. So this one, everybody should recognize. This is where Locals is. So this is the Veers Stevens house. Um, And I think the picture on the left is sometime in the 30s or 40s. The picture on the right, I think, is from the 50s or early 60s. Home was built in the 1840s by the Veers family. Um, it was, I think, later owned by the Selman family. The Selmans built a number of old structures throughout the Ag Reserve and this western portion of the Ag Reserve area. And this is another good example of a home that, at least from the front angle and from the side, it really hasn't changed all that much in appearance. Obviously, we all know that on the interior, it has changed fairly significantly, especially over the last, 5 to 10 years. Uh, my favorite story with this home is just, again, because it's in the center of town and built prior to the Civil War, saw a lot of different um, I would assume a lot of different units of troops going past it. There's some story that a Confederate soldier who was cut off from his unit when he was here in town on some kind of raiding party or to see family members or something, basically got surrounded and was hidden under the bed upstairs by one of the servants who worked in the home when the Union troops were looking for this soldier. How true is that story? Who knows, but it's a good one. And I just like to think every time I'm sitting upstairs in that front room eating, I think about what could have taken place in that room at some point. It's kind of fascinating to think. And the other kind of cool thing about this picture um, on the right and a little bit on the left as well is you can on the far right of both pictures, you can kind of see a structure that is the John Poole house right there connected. At this point in time, the John Poole house actually had kind of an interesting addition built onto the back of it when it was used as a family home for a while. That addition has been removed when HMD did a lot of refurbishment work. So I think you're seeing potentially portions of that. And then in this picture on the right, on the far left, like way back in the distance, what you're actually looking at is I always call it the Evans house, but it's that big white house that kind of shares a driveway with locals now. So we're getting kind of that side profile of the home that very much, this view looks exactly the same today if you were standing in this position. Okay, so the more that I go and visit and check out old homes and learn about old homes and their structures, the more I think that the Dr. Thomas Poole house is really kind of a spectacular old home that I think because we're so used to all seeing it every single day, we've gotten used to it being there. But it is a home built this is kind of personally my favorite time frame for old homes being built, kind of 1830s, anywhere from 1810 to 1840 is kind of for me the sweet spot of these big federal style homes. This one I think is significant for a number of reasons. One, just the proportions are really large. It's a lot bigger than a lot of the other federal properties we see in the area. Two, just some of the architectural details like the fan light on the outside up top in the attic, and then kind of the I think there's a word for, I want to say they call this like a balustrade or a kind of like a fort type double chimney up on the roof line, which is really pretty unique for this area and really interesting. I also think the fact that we have these dormer windows and that these dormers are original to the home is fascinating because a lot of times, and I know that because when we look at, there's that kind of very I wouldn't say famous, but a lot of people in town have seen that picture looking down the center of Poolesville during the Civil War, where there's a bunch of troops kind of milling about in the center of town, and way, way, way off in the distance, you can actually see this house and you can see the dormer windows. So I know that they were there at least in, I think, 1862. So my guess is that they're original. Um, and that is kind of unique as well. We have a lot of old houses in the area today that have attic dormer windows, but that they were added on later. Aix-la-Chapelle is a really good example of that. If we look at early pictures of the house, it does not have those, and today it does. And so that's kind of also unique that it had that. Um, so yeah, just a really interesting home for those that have been in town for a long time. You know that it's been through a lot of different kind of iterations of life. From it was a restaurant at some point. It was, I think, the high school principal's home for a period of time when it was initially built. You know, the small portion on the left side of the front of the home was the doctor's office. And of course, what's kind of cool about this picture here is you can also see the Frederick Pool house to the left of it, which is now the that new store that's selling antiques and interesting items, which I love that that place is opened up again for people to explore a little bit. But again, just a really kind of amazing structure in size and detail, and rare to build this kind of home in a pretty small agricultural town like Poolsville was, and still to many in many cases is. So on Wooten Avenue, right next to the high school, is the Dr. Wooten house. Dr. Wooten was obviously a doctor, but he actually was, I believe, a surgeon or at least a doctor in Elijah White's unit in the Confederate cavalry during the Civil War. And I think he was actually captured and taken prisoner late in the war, kind of close to the war's end in 1865 in Loudoun County. And then when the war ended, was paroled and returned to town. Got into politics, also got into business with his former commander, Elijah White. They ran, I think, the factory or the factory warehouse building down at Edwards Ferry for a time. But he built this home in 1868. Another, fairly large grand home, especially for that time period, built in a very common Victorian style, center door. You open to the hallway with the stairs going up, and you've got rooms on both the left and the right. Um, what I think is interesting, and I don't know what the story is exactly, but this home, if you look in the right-hand picture, notice that there's only this chimney on this one side. If you look in the left picture, and this was taken, I want to say it's not as old as it looks. I think this is from like the 60s. But the chimney there's a chimney on the left. There's also one on the right. You just can't see it from the tree. So at some point, something happened. I'm not sure what, and it lost a chimney. There's also, Jim sent me some really good pictures a ways back where there was pictures of kind of the fair or the fairgrounds at the high school. And there's a bunch of stalls with like pigs and other animals like down the road. And in the background, you could actually see the back of this house. And you could see both chimneys, which I thought that was actually the way that I first noticed that. So I've always kind of wondered if we were to go up in the attic, if there's any kind of sign of what took place from the inside. But again, really a cool home that was sold a couple of years ago. So this is the Evans. I call it the Evans house. It really isn't. It was really the St. Peter's rectory, and built, we think 1885. I've seen 1880 to 1885, so somewhere in that zone. Very much Victorian, a little bit of Gothic style, even a little bit of like Italianate features with the attic window kind of having that curve to the top. Um, Relatively simple in detail in nature. What I think is interesting is there are actual examples of this home. So the Lindenwood farmhouse just outside of town, it was on the tour we did, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago. It's basically, Lindenwood is essentially the exact same house. The proportions are just bigger, and the details are a little bit like richer. So it was clearly that, I don't know, there was more time or money spent on it, perhaps because it was a private residence and this was built as a rectory. But a very similar layout to others. I haven't been in the home in a couple of years now since my close friends, the Evans, moved out of this home. Although I did just